Today I'm painting a holiday card with some oranges and some greenery, so let's get started. Now, unfortunately, I had started painting before I recorded, but that's okay. I just had painted the oranges and painted some orange slices. All my products are in the link in the description on the video. But I'm primarily using watercolors, a little bit of gouache, and some brusho crystals to add a little bit of fun. I started off by drawing a circle with a pencil, and that'll be the guide for the wreath. I erase the circle when I'm done, but it helps to keep it nice and round. I've done it without drawing a circle before, and it always looks a little bit lopsided. So I'm starting with, I got this little set of brushes by Golden Maple online. Those are the set that I'm using, and I'm kind of using, it's really equivalent to a round brush, a number 6 in size if you're using another brand. But I started with the oranges, did a couple orange slices, and now I'm doing some pine cones. When I'm creating wreaths, I really like to create a variety of color. And so, I don't want just green leaves and, flowers, or in this case, oranges, but I want some other texture and things like that. So I like to put in things like pine cones or berries or, other things that can give the wreath a little bit of texture. So as those are drying, now I'm going to move back on to the greenery. So in this case, I'm actually using a gouache green by Turner, and it's more of like an olive color. I'll add in, some other greens just to, again, like we're really trying to give the wreath some variety so that, it looks interesting and has depth to it. So first I painted the leaves, and then while they're still wet, I use a dry brush and pick up some crystals from the brusho colors. And brusho is essentially dried like watercolor crystals, and they just make a really cool effect and pattern on whatever it is that you're painting. I use them here. They're not light fast, so they will sort of fade over time. But for a greeting card or anything that you're going to scan where you want some really cool texture, they can do that. So you can see here I'm painting the leaves first and connecting it with the stem. The brown brush is really good for this because you can, the tip can be used for a stem or a twig. And then, when you push down on the brush as you're dragging it across the page, you get that nice sort of leaf shape. I'd really recommend just practicing on a piece of paper. I mean, this is what you're seeing here is years worth of practice. And there were definitely times where I just took an empty sheet of paper and all I did was paint leaves over and over and over again, because you want to be able to, see how the different paintbrushes work, understand what kind of pressure you need, the different shapes that it can create. And you want to get used to it so that while you're actually actively painting a card, you're not learning, but you feel really comfortable already with the kind of shape you're going to get out of your leaf. So you can see here I painted the leaf, and then I put the brusho on and shot, just kind of gently pushed the crystals onto the wet leaf. And as that dries, the crystals will just make a really neat pattern. So we'll just go on here for a little bit and finish painting the leaves. Again, when I'm doing the wreaths, I kind of like to have that bit of variety that I told you about, but I like to start, in particular on the leaves, kind of having one primary leaf that is consistent all the way around. And then it almost serves as a base leaf. And then, you can kind of add things to it. I didn't mention this before, but here I am adding another fruit slice because I kind of realized as I was painting this that, I need a little bit more color in this upper section. So, but, getting back to what I was saying, you'll notice that I started with the oranges, then added the pine cones, and now I'm adding the leaves. And I do that because, I want to, you need obviously some big things, and I don't necessarily want to paint over those big things I don't want to paint the leaves first and then have to paint over the leaves with something big, especially if you're using watercolor because of its transparency. So oftentimes I'll start my wreaths by painting the biggest elements, whether that's a flower or a pine cone or, again, in this case, an orange. So I'll paint the big elements first. And then also it helps me to make sure that they're kind of distributed in a way that is pleasing. Because if you paint the leaves first and then your big elements on top of it, then you're going to be putting the big elements like flowers in areas where, you've got space in between leaves. And then sometimes it just makes the placement of things look a little bit odd. So anyway, I like to start with the big items and then add the greenery around that. So that was sort of the rationale for why, I started with the oranges and then added the pine cones and then went back and added leaves. So we'll just wrap up with these leaves and then we'll be moving on to kind of the next leaf in just a minute. So now I'm going to add berries. Actually, I thought I was going to add the leaf, but I'm going to start with the berries to fill in some of the space. I kind of, when I usually do berries, I usually think of, I like berries in bunches generally. So I'm going to do, somewhere between 5 and 7 little berries generally in each bunch. Sometimes I'll do little bunches of 2 or 3 if I want to fill in a space. But to add variation in color, because in nature, nothing is just one single color. So usually I'll start with a light color as the base for the berries. And then I'll kind of come over that and either add in a darker color just by getting some dark color on my paint and then touching one of the berries and making them a slightly different shade. Or I will get, a darker color on one of my paintbrushes and then go over like the stem of the berry. And when you kind of drag the darker color through what you've already painted, it'll pull in some of that color and then it adds just some variation. Again, before you want to actually paint your wreath, practice all of these elements on another sheet of paper so that you can, again, get a feel for what it is that you want to paint, different ways that you can paint it. It's a really good idea to just play and test things out before you just sit down and actually create a wreath. So again, you can see here, the base color is actually a really light orange. And then I'm going to come back through and add a dark red stem. And so when I pull the stem through these light orange kind of berries, it'll, like I said, it'll pick up some of that color. So here we are. I picked up a smaller brush. It's a really teeny detail brush. And I'm using that to kind of create the stems on these berries. And as I mentioned, I'm using a dark red for the stem. And when you go over the lighter berries that we already painted, it'll start to pull that red into the lighter color. And so then you'll get some really nice variations in the color of the berries so that they're not all flat in one color. And don't worry, as you can see, I'm being really quick about it and I'm not really worrying about it because, as watercolor dries, like it's going to look a little weird when you first drag it through and you're going to think, oh my gosh, this is going to look awful. But as watercolor dries, it will start to sort of blend a little bit better. And so you don't end up with those streaks. You actually end up with some really, nice variations in color. They kind of get blended and the streaks soften up a lot as things dry. So, again, play with this outside on a separate piece of paper and do a little testing. Maybe you could do some, blending. Try it when you're just dragging the stem through the berries without blending and then wait and see what that looks like when it dries. The most important thing that's always lost when, we're doing these little videos is that, I have hours and hours and hours of playing and testing and practicing. I have plenty of wreaths over the years that didn't turn out, that I just had to throw away because it didn't turn out right. So, this is many, many hours worth of time spent over, the course of a couple of years developing out my style and my skills. So, take your time and just practice. Okay, so now that everything has been painted and dried, I'm going to add my text in. So I start with a line and pencil, which I'll come back and erase later. And I'm getting the gold on a small paintbrush. And, again, this is another one. I literally it took me, a couple years to really be able to paint sort of freehand, this lettering style. But it's similar to doing the leaves where, you can use the tip of your paintbrush when you want thin lines. And then when you want thicker lines, you just press down on the brush so that it gives you that thicker line. And you can kind of see when I start to press down. Another thing to notice is that I'm holding this paintbrush upright, not at an angle. That'll give you better control over what it is that you're painting and drawing and writing. For this, I'm using, like I said, a gold, and you can have that list at the that's on YouTube. And listen, this isn't perfect. You can see even looking at this one, the word itself is not centered because I kind of started off with the B. There's like a little tail on the B at the beginning. And it meant that, when I finished the D on blessed, it was like already at the other end. So, it's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. And I've gotten okay with that over the years. Okay, so I finished painting the word, and then I really like to add the gold in and add some gold accents. So I'm using these teeny little leaves, again, the same small brush that I used to write with, and I'm making these little leaves and branches to fill in some of the gaps in this wreath. And then it just adds, again, more texture and more interest. I think the thing that I just have found after playing and painting wreaths for so long is that the more interesting, unique colors and textures that you can have, within your wreath, the better. You don't want to go overboard because you do want some, you know, you want to kind of limit your color palette and have some repetition, but make sure that each of the leaves that you choose and the flowers that you choose are unique and kind of have their own texture. All right, so we'll finish up these. And I'm just going through and just kind of seeing where there's some gaps, where there's some spaces that don't look quite right or look too open. This one up at the top, I felt like the top of the wreath looked a little bit flat, so I just wanted to add a little area that poked out there. And that was just, a little open, a little white. I'm just kind of going by intuition as I am painting this and really just stepping back and looking and seeing where there's, something that just looks a little bit off. All right, now I just checked just to make sure that was dry, and now I'm going through with an eraser and just erasing the line that I used as a guide for my lettering. And now I'm going in and just adding a little bit of that gold embellishment to some of the other elements, like this orange slice. And just really doing this, again, to add some interest, to add some texture. The gold is really great. And when you see it, in real life and you're, looking at the card, the light is always playing off of the gold. And so it's nice to kind of have elements that have a little bit of highlight of that gold. So I'm not fully tracing it. This isn't really dark. It's just a teeny weeny bit of gold added very lightly around, the outside of the orange, and then a couple of the orange slices just to highlight that a little bit. And then I'm doing the same thing with the oranges. Just a little bit of extra. Listen, I love gold, so I add it to everything. I can't help myself. Sometimes I go a little bit overboard. All right, and that's it for the orange. Now I'm just, for the card painting, just adding my signature. And that's it. I'll turn it around here so you can see. Really pretty, really simple, and makes a nice gift for people. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something.